Being in a relationship during the pandemic isn't exactly a walk in the park.
Think of the context of our world through the pandemic, and not just that, but like 2020 in general brought a lot of big stuff happening in our world, like the social justice movement and really addressing racial issues and the political climate and pandemic. That context is like the petri dish that your relationship is existing inside of.
I'm Fernando.
I'm Janine, and I'm exploring how the pandemic has impacted people in a relationship.
I'm looking into how COVID-19 has changed how we date.
And this is Tag Team, Relationships, Dating, and COVID-19. Even without all the challenges of 2020, marriage is hard, and the people signing up to take on that challenge and tie the knot has been on a steady decline since the 1980s. Marriage rates hit an all-time low of 6.5 marriages per 1,000 people in 2018, the most recent year this data was available. And we can safely say 2020 was not the year where we'd suddenly see a marriage boom. From pandemic shutdowns to economic instability, researchers at Bowling Green State University found that the number of people getting married dropped significantly last year as people opted to wait to put a ring on it. Another time the US saw a huge dip in marriages? The 1930s, when we were in another international crisis, the Great Depression. And married or not, this pandemic has given couples a ton of emotional baggage to work through as it brings all of these issues to the surface.
Things are just escalated. You feel like you can't really escape. Your communication starts to hit the fan and you feel like you just are not being heard. And so we hear people complain about those types of things, communication, we can't listen, we're not hearing each other. I've even seen it go as far as people experiencing this sense of like, we are incompatible. Like, we had a great relationship to this point, but I just don't even know how we're together anymore.
As if maintaining a happy, healthy relationship wasn't hard enough, these days, navigating the pandemic adds an extra layer of give and take, especially if you aren't on the same page about things like social distancing and face masks.
That is a really tough spot because what is usually a pillar of a healthy relationship is when it's not necessarily when you agree on everything or believe the same things, but it's how you deal with those differences. But there's a saying, you can be right or you can be in a relationship. If the conversation becomes like, I'm right and you're wrong, then you're kind of stonewalled in this place of rigid conflict, and it's going to be hard. A lot of times you see people coming to couples therapy as a last ditch resort to try and get out of this crisis. Sometimes it's almost too late.
And for couples who can't work through it, the pandemic is keeping divorce attorneys like Brian Lepak busy.
COVID has pushed people to have to interact more with each other, and people who are having difficulties in working through their problems and communicating with one another, COVID has only exacerbated their problems. I think that COVID has given people more time on their hands. If you have more time on your hands, you're going to think about your situation and maybe think, I should be changing my life and moving forward.
You'd think that sheltering in place together for nearly a year would be enough to drive those divorce rates up, but preliminary data shows that the divorce rate has not risen, and that's because, well, divorces are expensive and people are out of work. But these attorneys are still super busy. Some report that the pandemic is making people more anxious to finalize divorces they already started, or pushing them to revisit the settlement terms they already had.
Some of the things that people want to do is reduce the amount of support they're paying because they're not receiving the income they ordinarily would receive. Some people are seeking relief from the court because they have more time on their hands, so they want to spend more time with their children, so they want to increase their custodial time. Some people are more serious about COVID, others are not. Some people want to wear masks, some people don't. Some people think their kids should be concerned about COVID, some people think they don't. So one of the issues may be a parent who allows their kids to have a lot of play dates or to see other kids, and they may ask the court to make a decision on what's best for the child. with regard to how they handle COVID.
For all the strain the pandemic has put on relationships, there is a silver lining. Whether you're in a relationship or on your way out of one, the pandemic has forced us all to take a deeper look at our relationships and ourselves.
So even though like a lot of couples are at this like heightened place of like more intense or more frequent conflict than maybe they normally would have been in, I almost see that as like a really great opportunity to jump in, to lean in, which is oftentimes uncomfortable, but to use this time as a way to really break down like, okay, when we're in the thick of it, like this is what I do and this is what you do. And we explore like, where does that come from? Where did you learn that? The conflict is really an invitation to go deeper into yourself. Like it has huge benefits.
Dating during COVID is
straight up trash
and very lockdown heavy.
Waste of time.
Really hard.
a mixed bag. I wouldn't know. I'm not single. I'm not showing off, but I have friends who are single. So I asked them to share their most quintessential pandemic dating stories.
I had a date scheduled on that day when it rained like crazy. So instead of canceling, we both agreed that we were going to go on the date anyway. Probably would have been better off with a date swimming in the ocean rather than being in that weather.
I isolated for 2 weeks before Christmas. During those 2 weeks, my partner got really upset with me because he felt like I was using COVID as a way to distance myself from him.
The only thing that I'm probably dating right now is my couch, and the way that we've gotten close is honestly none of your business.
Sounds of New York during a pandemic.
When the pandemic upended every aspect of our lives,
This is the moment to not be going to the grocery store.
our romantic lives included, single Americans turned to dating apps in droves. Hinge said messaging on the dating app increased by 30% in March of 2020, and Tinder reported the most swipes it had ever seen in a single day, 3 billion.
The lack of events in which I would normally meet people that I'd be interested in dating made me a lot more open-minded to online or app dating, which I previously was really against.
Just the general pool of online dating is larger than it has ever been before.
To help me understand the paradigm shift we've seen in the world of dating, I talked to Jeffrey Hall, a professor of communication studies at the University of Kansas Relationships and Technology Lab, and Alessandra Conti, a professional matchmaker in Los Angeles.
I'm an open book.
So much about dating has changed. People are waiting longer for that first kiss, and 71% of singles say they haven't had sex with anyone during the pandemic. Online, coronavirus restrictions have inspired creative solutions. On Instagram, user-created dating shows like Love is Quarantine, a take on the popular dating show Love is Blind, let everyday users go on blind dates via Instagram DMs. On dating apps, Quarantine and Chill has replaced Netflix and Chill. And on hookup apps like Scruff, vaccinated has become the new STI negative.
People are in a mentality now where even the very thought of sitting across from a person over a meal or having a drink together can actually be something very dangerous. As a consequence, it puts a lot of pressure in order to form relationships prior to actually that face-to-face meeting.
Because of that, many have turned to video calls as a way to avoid in-person contact, yes, but also as a way to pre-screen people and see how seriously they're taking COVID precautions.
In order to pre-screen people and determine how much you trust them and like them before you interact.
A survey of US singles found that 68% use that first video date to determine if they want an in-person date. And as more people started relying on virtual first dates, dating apps rushed to roll out video chat features. As first dates become technologically and logistically easier, some are finding they finally have the time to go on dates.
They actually all of a sudden have a lot of time and energy to put into a relationship.
Matchmakers in the City, a boutique matchmaking agency in LA, San Francisco, New York, and DC, says it had to hire a new matchmaker to keep up with the demand they were seeing because of the pandemic.
We had one bachelorette. She was an attorney. She had been single for many, many, many years. And I really believe that the reason she was single was because she was so busy. This was a woman who was traveling constantly. So finally, when COVID hit, she finally was like, ladies, I'm ready. Let's do this. And finally, we introduced her to the most amazing guy. It's been so amazing. See, I know he's about to propose to her. because he told us. So it's so beautiful.
And even for those who aren't looking for a serious relationship, the pandemic has turned any in-person date into a very serious affair.
Prior to the pandemic, if people were out on a date with one another and they had met through some sort of app, there wasn't an expectation that on that first time they met face to face, they'd be having, are we exclusive? Like, are we having this conversation this time? Absolutely not. It was not appropriate to do so. But currently, what's interesting is we switched that around where there's so much pressure to be safe that the kind of conversations that people would usually reserve for having the, are we in a relationship, are having earlier in order to make people feel safe with the process of sharing breath, with kissing, with being able to even converse without a mask.
Here's my friend Caitlin.
I actually met my current boyfriend during the pandemic. We met on Tinder and went on a few socially distanced dates. We didn't even kiss until like the third or fourth date when we knew that this was going to be more than just friends or like a fleeting thing.
And just because dating has become less physical, it doesn't mean it's become less sexual.
People are engaging in a lot more virtual play with sex, right? So they're sexting more, they're being more titillating in their conversations shared through pictures and suggestive things, and they're also engaging in virtual sex in ways which are extremely creative.
By the way, Jeff thinks this new digital sex play is here to stay, even when the pandemic is over. And then there's also this. The pandemic has forced all of us to take a good hard look at ourselves. What makes us happy, who makes us happy, what matters, and what doesn't.
Pre-pandemic, a lot of people were focused on more, lifestyle compatibility. Like, does he love to travel? Does he love to go to events? Does he love to go out? Whereas now the shift is about the person at their core and truly the values of the person.
It was pretty wild how that actually led me to meet someone who's been really great and has actually pursued me despite pandemic obstacles. Having to be far away from him a lot, I can objectively see that he treats me really well.
For every single person who's been able to spark some magical connection during these dark times, there are plenty who haven't had any luck during these socially distant times. In fact, at the onset of the pandemic, experts worried that we would see a loneliness crisis sweep the nation.
They were meeting people, they were joining clubs, they were going to movies, they were doing all of these things which were social and outside the house. With all of that taken away, there's been a lot of isolation, a lot of feelings of being disconnected, a lot of feelings of being lonely.
But early data is promising. A survey that's periodically checked in on 1,545 adults since January of 2020 found that there's been no significant change in perceptions of loneliness. In fact, in some instances, people feel more emotionally supported right now. That said, there are still a lot of people grappling with feelings of loneliness. And if that's you, know that that's very normal and that you're not alone. If you or someone you know is thinking about suicide, contact the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-TALK.